Hi, I'm Steph and this is lesson 10. So today we're talking about the key features of conflict theory and evolutionary theory. And in terms of conflict theory, we're going to be looking at Marx and neo-Marxist theory. And in terms of evolutionary theory, we're going to be looking at neo-evolutionary theory and Rostow. So the reason that we're doing those two as a separate lesson is because those are the two that will then apply to Papua New Guinea further on in the country study. And the reason we apply two theories instead of one is to give students a choice during their exam as to what they will talk about depending on the question. So first of all, we'll start with the bushland and plant analogies and link to the plant in a pot and then extrapolate to the country as a whole. So we've got our land links and we've got our deconstruct and reconstruct and our symbols and images quite clearly there. The first thing that you want to do is show this conflict theory video, and I'll see if I can link it in for you here. So this video shows conflict theory, but it uses gummy bears and it's quite amusing. What I like to do with classes is actually give out packets of gummy bears, and you'll find them actually acting out the conflict theory scenes on their desks with the gummy bears, and that's all good. So let's have a look at that now. So you can see that video just explores the very basics of conflict theory. What you'll do is then jump off from there and have a talk about conflict theory, which will be like a transformative phase, taking those ideas that they've just pulled out of that video and placing them into the context of the course concepts. Then there's another video which you can access on YouTube here, which is just a more detailed look at conflict theory. So we're also going to talk about this as a neo-Marxist theory. So neo just means new. It's not really workers and factories anymore. And then we can give examples of things like the feminist movement. So we're going to talk about the evolution of that theory into modern times, which leads us into evolutionary theory and Rostow's economic model. So I've got a little example of how you could teach that on the whiteboard. I'll just see if I can insert that here. Hi, I'm Steph, and today we're going to be talking about evolutionary theory. Evolutionary theory is based on Darwin's theory of the evolution of species. This basically stated that the strongest survive, and the species that aren't as strong, the lesser versions, are bred out over time. So it's all about species evolving over time. And during this process of evolution, they actually improve because the better, stronger animals reproduce and lesser versions drop off in the end. So how do we apply a theory that's predominantly based on animals and plants and breeding fittest specimens how does that relate to a culture or a society? Well, that's what we call social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is the theory that the strongest societies, the fittest societies, will eventually take over the least fit, the least strong, and we'll have this homogenization of culture where the strongest culture survives and the others don't. So there's a lot of inherent judgments here. So it's saying that one culture is better or more advanced or more evolved than another. So if you see this as primitive man living in caves and stuff, across time you see this as an advanced society, that's a social Darwin theory, that evolution from what they see as primitive to what they see as advanced. What I'm saying here is that to see this as primitive and to see this as advanced is an inherent values judgment. What makes this better than that? Why is this better? And there's arguments to be made that actually it's not better. So what you've got to think about are the implications on the micro, meso, macro levels of a dominant culture taking over all of the other less dominant cultures. And another thing that it's worth thinking about is that this type of social Darwinism applies evolutionary theory to all societies and cultures. So that has huge implications for things like cultural diversity. And it also has huge implications for the way we think about other people from different cultures. So if we view our European white culture as being superior to other cultures, then we will believe that through the process of social Darwinism, our culture will eventually reign supreme and all those other cultures that are lesser than ours will just get bred out. So an example of a neo-evolutionary theory, and neo just means new. So when we say a neo-evolutionary theory, we just mean a new, updated evolutionary theory. An example of that is Rostow's model of economic development. So Rostow talks about economies moving from subsistence or primitive farming through what he calls stages of development. until they reach this high mass consumption utopia at the other end. And Rostow's argument is that given the right conditions in these stages, all societies will develop along this same course, along this same timeline, and end up at the same place of high mass consumption utopia. So you can see that there's lots of values judgments involved in that. Just think about the word choice. Words like evolution, development and advanced, all saying that it's better to be here than it is to be here. So for a lot of traditional societies, they're quite happy here and don't see this as better or desirable. But there's no allowance made for that under this theory. So you need to think about whether or not everybody wants to evolve, and the end point of evolution is this high mass consumption state of being. Does everybody want that? Does everybody want their society to be this high mass consumption society? And that's also a values judgment. But that's Rostow's model of economic development. It is a neo-evolutionary theory, so it does come with all those values judgments built in. So I hope you've enjoyed applying evolutionary theory to societies, and hopefully in class we'll go through and apply it to Papua New Guinea. So you can see there how we teach evolutionary theory. The next thing that we would do is relate Rostow's model of economic development, which is a neo-evolutionary theory, and dependency theory, which is conflict theory. It's a neo-Marxist theory, and how they interact in the world. So you would be explaining to students the idea of what a neo-evolutionary theory is and what a neo-Marxist theory is. So you'd start with Rostow, and you'd say that's neo-evolutionary, and you'd argue that Rostow says that all societies will develop given the right conditions. So he's arguing for this very linear timeline of development, from pre-development to post-development, and he basically is saying that all societies develop the same way over time. So rich and superior countries should help poor and less evolved countries to develop. So for example, up here you've got Australia, and down here somewhere, not quite reaching the preconditions of takeoff, you've got Papua New Guinea. And according to Rostow's theory of economic development, if Papua New Guinea is supplied with the right conditions, they also will be able to develop to get to here. So therefore, it's up to Australia to come back here and help Papua New Guinea to move them forward. So according to Rostow, the help that we are providing to Papua New Guinea will eventually move them into this utopian high mass consumption society that we're in. But then if you contrast that with dependency theory, that's where all the readings that we've given students from the World Bank, etc., come in. So dependency theory is arguing that these poorer countries actually never do catch up. They end up in a cycle of dependency because countries that are up here, rich countries, are actually exploiting the resources of Papua New Guinea and keeping them for themselves rather than actually giving the money to Papua New Guinea to move them forward. It's all about these countries being self-interested. So forcing countries onto the economic timeline to development sets them up for failure because they have to borrow money, and then they get caught in this cycle and never catch up. And it's a cycle of exploitation and dependency, really. So the other thing that you look at is from a cultural perspective. All societies have different cultures, and in some societies, a high mass consumption culture isn't superior or even desirable. So you question the underlying idea that West is best and that evolution is desirable. So in terms of Papua New Guinea, you're actually going to look at whether this Rostow model can explain the rapid development in Papua New Guinea, or whether dependency theory is more applicable. And that's what you'll outline in this lesson, and then you'll go more into detail with that during the country study. So I hope that's been a good enough explanation for you. That's lesson 10. I hope you enjoy teaching it. Bye.